The flashing blue lights from 3 police cruisers illuminated the narrow hallway of my apartment building, casting long, erratic shadows against the walls. My landlord, Mr. Chen, was aggressively screaming obscenities in Mandarin as 2 officers physically pinned him against his own front door, snapping cold metal handcuffs onto his wrists. The 3rd officer was currently pulling a massive, industrial-grade extension cord out from beneath my baseboards, the physical proof that had finally brought an end to an incredibly complex, parasitic scheme. The other tenants had their doors cracked open, watching in stunned silence as the man who had tormented us for years was finally stripped of his power and publicly humiliated. To understand how a simple conversation about a high electric bill ended with my landlord being hauled away in the back of a squad car, you have to go back to the exact moment he realized he had finally pushed me too far. I completely froze when Mr. Chen aggressively knocked on my apartment door at exactly 9 p.m. on a quiet Tuesday night. He absolutely never visits his tenants unannounced, and he definitely doesn't show up this late at night unless something is seriously, structurally wrong with the building. How long have 2 families been living here? He demanded aggressively, his face flushed red, completely bypassing any standard greeting. He was holding his smartphone up high like a piece of undeniable legal evidence, pointing it directly at my face as if he were catching me in the act of a massive crime. I laughed nervously, gripping the edge of the doorframe. Mr. Chen, I live entirely alone. You know that. It's just me. He aggressively shook his head and shoved the screen of his phone practically into my face. Then explain this, he snapped. It was a digital copy of my monthly electric bill, and the usage graph had absolutely skyrocketed, tripling in just the last 2 billing cycles. Then, with a dramatic swipe of his finger, he showed me the municipal water bill, which had somehow impossibly quadrupled over the same exact period. Someone is using a massive amount of water and electricity in this specific unit. Either you're running some kind of illegal commercial operation in here, or you've got unauthorized people living with you that aren't on the official lease. My stomach completely dropped out of my body. I honestly hadn't noticed that my utility bills were that high, simply because they auto-pay directly from my checking account every single month, and I never actually checked the itemized statements. I swear to you, I live alone, I pleaded, my voice tight with sudden anxiety. Can I please take a closer look at those bills? He roughly handed me his phone, and I stood there staring at the numbers in absolute disbelief. They were completely insane. The usage indicated multiple families washing heavy loads of clothes, taking endless hot showers, and cooking around the clock. If you think your landlord is just a little greedy, you might want to check behind your walls after you hear how this guy was actually bleeding me dry. Mr. Chen, I work 50 hours a week at the firm. I'm barely ever home, and I don't even cook most nights. I order takeout. I have absolutely no idea what is going on here, I stated firmly, handing the phone back to him. He crossed his arms over his chest, his eyes narrowing with deep suspicion. I'm going to need to officially inspect the unit. Right now, he demanded, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. I slowly stepped aside and let him cross the threshold. My apartment looked exactly how I had left it that morning, a single, unwashed coffee mug sitting in the sink, my open laptop resting on the couch, and absolutely nothing out of place. We silently walked through every single room together, inspecting the bedroom, the small bathroom, and the tiny galley kitchen. Everything appeared completely normal and quiet, right up until we reached the small utility closet in the hallway where the main water heater sits. Mr. Chen aggressively yanked the door open and then went completely, unsettlingly still. I leaned over his shoulder to see what he was staring at, and my confusion instantly morphed into a sharp, terrifying realization. There was a massive, thick black extension cord plugged directly into the wall outlet next to my water heater. The cord was then violently forced through a jagged, roughly chopped hole in the drywall, completely disappearing into the dark void between the walls of my apartment and the unit next door. What the hell is that? I asked, my voice rising in panic as I pointed at the illegal wiring. Mr. Chen didn't answer me, his face had drained of all color, and he immediately reached out to slam the closet door shut, attempting to physically block my view of the hole. It's nothing. Just some old construction wiring left over from the previous renovation, he stammered, his sudden shift from aggressive accuser to panicked liar incredibly obvious. I'll have a maintenance guy come look at it next week. Forget about the bills, I must have read the meters wrong. He practically sprinted toward my front door, desperate to escape the conversation he had initiated just 5 minutes prior. I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding, processing the incredible speed of his sudden retreat. He had come here ready to evict me over high utilities, but the absolute second he saw that specific cord, he completely folded and tried to erase the entire interaction. That wasn't the behavior of a concerned landlord, that was the desperate panic of a man who realized his own trap had just sprung on the wrong target. I immediately walked back to the utility closet, grabbed the heavy black cord, and gave it a hard, experimental tug. It didn't budge. It was pulled incredibly taut through the drywall, leading directly into apartment 4B, the unit that Mr. Chen had explicitly told me was completely vacant and undergoing major renovations. I grabbed my flashlight, knelt down on the dusty floor, and shined the beam directly through the jagged hole in the drywall. The light illuminated the dark space between the studs, revealing that the black cord didn't just plug into a wall over there, it connected to a massive, industrial power strip. And plugged into that strip were several more heavy-duty cords, snaking off into the darkness of the vacant apartment. But the electrical theft was just the tip of the iceberg. As I adjusted the angle of the flashlight, I saw that the main copper water line feeding my apartment had been cleanly spliced. A thick, modern PVC pipe was violently tapped directly into my water supply, completely siphoning the pressure through the wall and into Unit 4B. My blood began to boil as the sheer magnitude of the financial theft washed over me. I wasn't paying for a leaky faucet or a drafty window, I was actively, entirely funding the utility costs of a massive, hidden operation right next door. And judging by Mr. Chen's terrified reaction, he knew exactly what was happening on the other side of that drywall. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I sat on my couch in the dark, meticulously reviewing the last 2 years of my bank statements, calculating exactly how much money had been slowly, silently drained from my accounts. The final number was absolutely staggering, representing months of lost savings and stolen labor. I realized that directly confronting Mr. Chen with this new information would be a catastrophic mistake. He was wealthy, deeply connected in the local real estate community, and possessed the legal power to simply evict me and completely cover up the evidence before I could legally prove anything. If I was going to get my stolen money back and hold him accountable, I couldn't just complain, I needed to orchestrate a trap that he couldn't possibly lie his way out of. The next morning, I called my office and used a sick day. I waited until I saw Mr. Chen's luxury SUV pull out of the building's parking lot, then I walked down the hall and stood silently in front of apartment 4B. If you've ever dealt with a landlord who thought he was completely untouchable, you are going to love exactly how I systematically destroyed his entire operation. I pressed my ear firmly against the cold wood of the door, holding my breath and straining to listen for any signs of life inside the supposedly vacant unit. Instead of the sounds of construction or renovation, I heard the distinct, rhythmic humming of massive, industrial-grade ventilation fans. The low, continuous vibration practically rattled the doorframe, indicating a serious, energy-intensive operation. I carefully tested the doorknob, unsurprised to find it completely locked, but I noticed a tiny, glowing green light near the top hinge, a high-end, discreet security camera pointing directly down the hallway. Mr. Chen wasn't just renovating an apartment, he was actively guarding a highly lucrative, illegal secret, and I was entirely footing the massive overhead costs. I retreated back to my apartment, my mind racing with terrifying possibilities regarding what he could be hiding next door. Was it a massive cryptocurrency mining farm? A high-yield illegal grow operation? Whatever it was, it required an absurd amount of electricity and water, and he had brilliantly decided to steal those resources directly from his own unsuspecting tenants to keep his personal operating costs at zero. I knew I couldn't just call the regular police non-emergency line. They would likely treat it as a civil landlord-tenant dispute and politely tell me to take him to small claims court. I needed undeniable, actionable proof of a major crime to force a criminal investigation. I spent the next 3 days operating like a ghost in my own building. I bought a cheap, high-definition endoscope camera online, the kind plumbers use to inspect pipes. Late Friday night, when the building was dead quiet, I opened my utility closet, carefully snaked the flexible camera directly through the hole in the drywall, and fed it slowly into the darkness of apartment 4B. I connected the camera feed to my smartphone, holding my breath as the grainy, green-tinted video slowly came into focus. The screen illuminated a massive, highly sophisticated cryptocurrency mining farm. Floor-to-ceiling metal racks were completely packed with dozens of high-powered, incredibly expensive computer servers, all violently whirring and generating a massive amount of heat. The PVC pipe that had been spliced from my main water line was connected to a massive, custom-built liquid cooling system, continuously pumping stolen water to keep the illegal servers from instantly melting down. Mr. Chen was actively generating thousands of dollars a day in untraceable digital currency, completely bypassing the massive commercial utility costs by parasitically draining the accounts of the hardworking people living in his building. I hit the record button on my phone, meticulously capturing 10 minutes of undeniable, high-definition video evidence of the massive server racks, the spliced water lines, and the thick extension cords feeding directly back into my specific unit. But I didn't stop there. I knew that video evidence alone might just result in a minor slap on the wrist or a simple zoning fine if he hired a good enough corporate lawyer. I needed to fundamentally destroy his entire operation while simultaneously guaranteeing he went to jail for grand theft. On Monday morning, I walked directly into the local branch of the municipal utility company, bypassing the customer service desk entirely and demanding to speak with the head of the commercial fraud investigation unit. I laid my smartphone on his desk, played the high-definition video, and slapped 2 years' worth of my hyperinflated utility bills down next to it. The investigator's eyes widened in absolute shock as he watched the video, immediately recognizing the sheer scale and sophistication of the massive power theft occurring right under their noses. He explained that stealing commercial-level utilities by actively bypassing municipal meters wasn't just a simple civil issue, it was a massive federal felony, carrying severe mandatory prison time and incredibly heavy financial restitution. The investigator immediately contacted the local police department's Economic Crimes Division, and we spent the next 2 hours meticulously coordinating the absolute perfect sting operation. They explicitly instructed me to return to my apartment, act completely normal, and absolutely not confront my landlord under any circumstances until the trap was perfectly set. The police needed to catch him physically inside the unit, actively managing the illegal servers, to permanently destroy any plausible deniability he might attempt to use in court. That evening, I sat on my couch, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I watched the digital clock on my microwave slowly tick forward. At exactly 8:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a single, cryptic text message from the lead detective: "We are in position. Make the call." I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and dialed Mr. Chen's personal cell number. I didn't yell, and I didn't accuse him, I simply manufactured a massive, immediate crisis designed to force his hand. "Mr. Chen, you need to get over here right now," I said, injecting pure, unadulterated panic into my voice. "The pipes in my utility closet just burst. There's water spraying everywhere, and it's actively flooding through the wall directly into apartment 4B. It's going to ruin the renovations." I heard a sharp, terrifying intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of keys violently jingling and a door slamming shut. "Do not open that door. Do not touch the water. I am coming right now," he screamed, his voice completely cracking with raw, unfiltered terror. He knew that if a pipe had actually burst, thousands of gallons of water were currently destroying hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of incredibly sensitive, uninsured computer equipment. Less than 5 minutes later, I heard the heavy, frantic pounding of his expensive leather shoes echoing down the hallway. I cracked my door open just an inch, watching through the narrow slit as Mr. Chen sprinted past my apartment, completely ignoring my supposed flood, and violently jammed his key into the deadbolt of Unit 4B. He threw the heavy door open, his face pale with absolute panic, completely expecting to find his massive, illegal empire drowning in a pool of my municipal water. Instead, he found the apartment completely bone dry, the servers humming perfectly, and absolute silence. But before he could even register the relief, the heavy fire doors at both ends of the hallway violently banged open. 3 uniformed police officers and the lead utility investigators sprinted down the corridor, their weapons drawn, completely surrounding him before he could even attempt to pull the door shut. "Mr. Chen, step away from the door and place your hands flat against the wall," the lead officer bellowed, his voice echoing off the cheap linoleum floors. Mr. Chen completely froze, his arrogant, untouchable demeanor instantly shattering as he looked from the armed officers directly to my cracked door. He saw me standing there, my phone raised, actively recording the entire glorious conclusion to his parasitic reign. "This is a misunderstanding. This is my private property," he stammered aggressively, desperately trying to physically block the doorway with his body. But the utility investigator simply stepped forward, shoved Mr. Chen aside, and walked directly into the blinding light of the massive server farm. "Looks like we found our missing megawatts," the investigator stated loudly, documenting the spliced water lines and the massive, illegal power grid with his own camera. The officers didn't hesitate. They forcefully grabbed Mr. Chen by his expensive suit jacket, spun him around, and slammed him hard against his own doorframe, the cold metal handcuffs clicking securely into place. He began violently screaming obscenities in Mandarin, completely losing his mind as the terrifying reality of his situation finally crushed him. The other tenants in the building slowly opened their doors, stepping out into the hallway in their pajamas, watching in stunned, absolute silence as the tyrant who had harassed them for years was completely humiliated. I stepped out of my apartment, walked right up to him as the officers held him against the wall, and smiled coldly. "I told you I lived alone, Mr. Chen. You should have just believed me." He was formally charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and severe structural endangerment. The utility company completely seized the building as collateral for the hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen municipal resources. During the subsequent investigation, they discovered he had been running similar parasitic operations in 3 other buildings he owned across the city, systematically bleeding dozens of working-class families dry to fund his luxury lifestyle. The massive class action lawsuit filed by the tenants, combined with the federal fines, completely bankrupted him before the criminal trial even officially started. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later, utilizing the massive, expedited settlement check his desperate lawyers offered me to secure a beautiful, quiet house in the suburbs. He thought he could steal from the quiet guy who worked 50 hours a week, completely unaware that he had just handed me the exact tools required to permanently dismantle his entire life.